Hey there. So, this is the one I've been nervous about. Spiritual warriorship. Um, this is one of the concepts on the homepage of the website that I feel very strongly about, and it's also an extremely intense topic to discuss. Um, it is tied intrinsically to this idea of healing, this idea of stewardship, of regeneration of community. It is tied very much to, I believe, a campaign that has been waged over the last 50 or so years around this word warrior. Most of my teachers in the martial arts have been military veterans and have also kind of found their way around to some relationship with nonviolence. My two early mentors, like kind of not mentors, but kind of idols, my two, kind of images of how I really wanted to kind of model my life growing up was Bruce Lee and uh, Gandhi. Um, some people would say like that's weird. Uh, those don't seem like linked people at all. But when we actually take Gandhi's writings on the concepts of ahimsa and his understanding of what he was doing in his resistance against the British Empire, there was a heart of warriorship. And what Bruce Lee was doing was, interestingly enough, also deeply tied to the British Empire, being from southern China and Hong Kong, coming up through the Hong Kong martial arts cinema, as anybody who understands the history of Hong Kong knows, deeply tied to the British Empire and their imperialistic tendencies through Asia. Um, these two men in particular were kind of uniquely aware of this kind of growing globalism, this growing awareness that the world was bigger than the nationalism that had fostered their learning up till that moment, right? Um, Gandhi was intrinsically linked and deeply found himself tied to his cultural concepts of Brahmanistic culture around Hinduism. He was a devout Hindu ascetic who found at the heart of his spiritual practices a warriorship that allowed for him to stand against the powers of this earth, no matter how big. And similarly, with Bruce Lee, he found at the heart of the spiritual traditions that traditional Chinese Kung Fu was linked to both this kind of inherent powerful tradition of Buddhism as well as this inherently powerful tradition of Taoism. And between the two of them, I think they really beautifully tie together the synthesis, right, the dialectical relationship that occurs within the Southeast Asian and Asian religious kind of traditions in a way that allowed them kind of uniquely to be cosmopolitan in their awareness of the world around them and the spiritual underpinnings which must inform the warrior. In the Western Hemisphere, we similarly find these concepts of the knight, nicht, of the Germanic term that the knight is kind of dependent upon. And in the West, we find similarly to another really common knightly or kind of tradition in the East of knighthood, which is the samurai, right? The idea of to serve. Um, these two traditions are interwoven intrinsically with, I'm just going to be really clear about this, fascist ideology and imperialistic tendencies, the desire to wield power and to impose it on others. So let's not be idealistic about this idea of what knighthood has meant in the past. This is why I'm not saying knights of the West. This is why I'm not saying knights from Japan, because I believe ultimately that those were the permutations and manifestations of this warrior instinct, this spiritually derived warrior ethos, as co-opted by culturally specific religious traditions, or in the case of Japanese knighthood, the culturally specific power dynamics of a very small island and its political bases constantly at war with one another. And you needed a warrior caste that could be dominated and controlled through religious methodologies, through religious ideologies. So in Gandhi and in Bruce Lee, we find two men who were willing to break with the ideologically dominated traditions while also finding the core of the heart of their warriorship. And that for me is what is required in this moment, a warriorship. I'm recording this one day after Martin Luther King Jr. Day, in the US. And to me, he is uniquely an example of a man who took on the warriorship that had been exemplified previously by Gandhi, right? There was overlap there. Mandela, similarly, Nelson Mandela in South Africa. Interestingly enough, Gandhi is tied to South Africa as he worked as a lawyer in South Africa after doing his training in England. And it was in South Africa that Gandhi gained a lot of his class consciousness that allowed him to go back to India and resist the empire. And it is inherently our global awareness of the solidarity that is required to stand up to the powers that be that allow us to step into our warriorship as beings. And this is, again, like I said in previous videos, this is tied to our healing, our stewardship, our regeneration. It requires us to be resolute. It requires us to be disciplined. It requires us to be empowered and powerful in ourselves and in our relationships. It requires me not just to say, I want to be strong. It requires me to say, if I'm going to be strong, you all need to be strong so that we are strong together. Because this is powerful. This is not. This I can snap like a little twig. This holds strong against the storm. And for me, spiritual warriorship, the claiming of spiritual warriorship, a new knighthood, we have to be very careful. We have to be very careful about how the fist, right? The fist and the desire to find the way which has both love and peacefulness and coexistence at its heart. My ideas of resistance are tied up in the idea of collaboration, cooperation, and non-transactional awareness of how we come together, as a species, as a populace, as a single humanity. Right now, we're watching around us, the mob, so to speak, is really coming to the forefront. And there is a lot of anger, there's a lot of aggression, but it is very undisciplined. It is very intellectually undisciplined. It is not willing to do the work of saying, who exactly are we standing against? It's just looking for easy scapegoats. The opposite of a mob, in my mind, is a knight, a knighthood, right? A disciplined, controlled, connected, unified group of people who have not just solidarity with one another, but also have shared languaging and symbols with one another, and are able to stand together in unified strength. And that to me is really our that to me is the image of our way forward. That to me is the way that we arrive in the future together, is by developing this cosmopolitan global awareness of our shared responsibility to each other, to ourselves, and to the earth that we inhabit, to be powerful in ourselves and in our relationships, and to hold each other to the highest possible standard around those things. Right? It is not enough to lean on our privilege. It is not enough to hide in our bunkers. It is not enough to take care of only our families. It is now that we must step into solidarity, connection, and sharing, right? How can I take my competencies and give them to as many people as possible to build capacity, build resiliency, build the world that I want to make sure that others inhabit, right? I know that I won't get to live in the world I want to inhabit. I know that that will not come about in my lifetime. It will take me long past my lifetime for my ideals to find fruition. All I care about is that those ideals are fought for. So it is up to me to say that I, from a spiritual awareness, will put down my individual interests and pick up the interests of others. That I believe it is worthy and worthwhile to say, my life is fleeting. I just turned 35. As far as I'm concerned, I'm just shadows and dust. I might as well not even be. So the time I do have left on this planet has to be spent selflessly working toward the phrase I always try to use, I always try to remember, to planting the seeds of trees whose shade I shall never know. Because it is only in that way that the spiritual warriorship and traditions of standing for and defending those who cannot stand for or defend themselves is going to happen. And literally, I mean, I'm not saying, like, oh, protect the women and the children, they're powerless. No, 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 no. Women, gender nonconforming, men, doesn't fucking matter. Everybody steps into warriorship in this time. This is not a call to men to be warriors. This is a call to all to be warriors. Not for children, because those children have to be trained to be warriors in this time. This is for the children who have yet to be conceived. They cannot stand for themselves. This is for the children's who have not even come into the potentialities of being yet, because they cannot stand for themselves. Those are the helpless. Those are the unable. Every one of us alive in this time and place are in it. We are all in this fight. There is no escaping it. We cannot go back. We can only go forward. And the only way forward is through. And the only way through is to hold the energy of the warrior. And the only way to hold the warrior without becoming the tyrant, without becoming the fascist, without becoming the destroyer, is to hold love at the center of our warriorship. And the only way to hold love is to find that which is spiritually transcendent and to have that be at the core of our awareness. It is only from this place that we can fight for things that are bigger than us. It is on that note that I share my profound gratitude for those who've come before me. I stand on the shoulders of men and women who have stood in the face of enemies that I could never imagine standing in the face of. I hope only to do them and future generations proud. I stand with you all in solidarity and love. Many blessings on your path. Thank you if you have followed me down this rabbit hole. I deeply appreciate your presence and support. Have a beautiful day.